一发今年29岁，是李光前自然历史博物馆的标本收藏专员。水母是他主要的研究对象。
We are at the wet collection. So there are two kinds of collection space in the museum, the dry collection and the wet collection. Wet because all the animals here are in preservative. It's either in ethanol or formalin. My jellyfish is in formalin.
博物馆收藏了超过55万件已完成归档的标本。这批鲜为人知的标本主要用在科学研究。一发在新加坡国立大学动物系求学时，因为一次的实地采集，而与标本结下了不解之缘。
My first encounter with specimens and preserving specimens was in the Comprehensive Marine Biodiversity Survey, trying to understand the marine biodiversity around Singapore.
那次的实地采集激起一发对制作标本的兴趣。
Every time I get a specimen, a jellyfish specimen, what I'll do actually is that first I would have to identify it, and then after that I would make sure that they are preserved properly. So a jellyfish usually has to be preserved in formalin because the formalin helps to retain the structure of the jellyfish. The jellyfish collection actually also has historical specimens, and these jellyfish have not actually been identified. So what I do is I go through the collection and identify, or maybe even re-identify some jellyfish based on updated literature. It is important that the integrity is preserved for future generations to come, because eventually, hopefully, someone would come along and identify them, and then it's still in the perfect condition to be worth something for science. So there are many different ways to preserve the same animal. For example, you can mount them in a more realistic way in a taxidermized specimen, or you can flatten them out, and they could still be very useful scientifically, but for different reasons, people would process them differently. Over the years, you realize how much historical materials there are and how important it is for every generation of curator to make sure that every specimen's integrity is preserved over time.
自然历史博物馆有一批传承自英殖民时代的标本，有的已超过150年的历史。从日常的标本保养到制作标签归档，都是劳神费时的工作。
从1921年采集的。
曾经守护着这一批古董级标本的人，便是今年77岁的卓春梅。
这是小番茄，有没有看到？
卓春梅，大家习惯称她为杨太太。她的声带在2018年化疗后，便出现失常的后遗症。
我是1944年出生在罗浮州的一个小甘榜，叫乌鲁州。
卓春梅中学时就对生物情有独钟，为她日后接下博物馆标本管理员这份工作奠定了重要的基础。
当我有机会进南大的时候，我就选择读生物。
可是卓春梅的祖母可不赞同她的想法。
我想要去南大读，她一口立刻就拒绝了，说：“女孩子读这样多书做什么？”我的家庭还是属于比较封建、男女不平等的时代。
幸好卓春梅获得叔叔和哥哥以及母亲的鼎力支持，才有机会上大学。
那么，这是我进南大的时候参加一些课外采集标本的照片。这是给龙，在给龙上面，我们一批同学就利用参考书，把这些鱼分类，找出它们的学名。对鱼类有兴趣，后来我就进到新大读鱼类文凭班。我们常常要检查 一些浮游生物。当时的实验室的设备很简陋。
卓春梅大学毕业后，曾经在区域海洋研究中心当助理，延续她所热爱的海洋生物研究。
同时呢，我也申请半工半读的研究生，研究新加坡海域的浮游生物。
1972年，卓春梅完成硕士课程。同一年，她受聘于当时的新加坡大学，准备将一批在国家博物馆的标本搬到动物系。
是我第一次看到这么庞大、这么珍贵的标本。
从前的新加坡国家博物馆可以看到采集自东南亚各地的野生动物标本。1972年，因博物馆改变发展方向，来佛士动物收藏室的部分标本移交新加坡大学动物系保管。
museum 里面，这个是楼上开放给公众参观的，你可以看到有这个珊瑚、鸟、蝴蝶大象，还有一只很大只的金鱼吊在天花板上面。金鱼的标本，有去过的人对这个的印象最深刻。
1972年，大学聘请卓春梅来管理的，则是另一批不向外展示、仅用于科学研究的标本。动物标本保存着生物的基因信息，有助于研究物种的进化。
全部是一个整个抽屉都是标本。当天看了之后，我是很兴奋。这些标本很多都是在19世纪就从东南亚采集来的，现在还这么完整。
卓春梅万没想到，往后的16年，他必须要为这批将近13万件的标本搬运多达4次。首个安置这批标本的地点，便是靠近亚裔拉惹的5个大型帐篷。
哇！我几乎要晕过去，要怎么把那些标本很好的收藏在这样的场所？哎呀，我整晚睡不着觉，不知道怎么做。
而且当时的搬运预算也只有750元。幸好卓春梅和团队同心协力，耗时1整年才完成搬运的工作。紧接着，他们又要为这批年久失修的标本进行修复。
它就是在修补我们是解骨师，要懂得怎样解它的骨它的皮怎么粘回去了好像这些骨骼，有时候牙齿掉出来，我们也要知道怎么放回去，不要放错地方。一直到了76年，因为国大要建这个国大医院，所以就要我们搬。
之后，这批标本被安置在新大5级芝马校园。由于标本数量太大，占用了当时的职员宿舍、法学院和文学系地下室。可是没多久，新大跟南大合并成联合校园，标本又要被迫搬迁，却找不到合适的空间。卓春梅担心这批脆弱的100年标本经不起一再的搬迁。标本要是有任何的损坏，都会影响到它的科学价值。
一坏了，不可能找到代替品，因为很多动物现在已经不是接种了，就是受保护，不能够再采集了。
当时的行政人员曾就此前来评估这批标本，结果给予的评价让卓春梅感到既无奈又愤怒。
他们看到一箱一箱的标本，回去报告，Mrs. Young 是收藏了很多棺材， 棺材里面都是死的标本，他们把它全部形成是没有用的东西，形容那些是棺材哈，对我来讲哈是一种好像有点侮辱的意思，对不对？那些是宝来的，他说是棺材没有用。
之后，有人提议将标本分送到不同的地方，唯独当时还是名年轻女子的卓春梅力求保留这批标本的完整。
戏里面也没有人怎么站出来说这个收藏品是很重要的。我是孤军作战，我就想到说我要怎么办。有时候我想到我会哭，那时候的确是真的，我没有什么经验。
相较于卓春梅的处境，一发的科研之途不但顺利，而且还有前辈们的经验指导。2015年，玉郎岛海岸出现一具抹香鲸尸体，自然博物馆出动一支队伍前往现场，准备将鲸鱼制作成标本。一发也参与了那次的行动。
The salvage of the Singapore sperm whale was my very first official project. After I graduated, I felt that was very inspiring because not just one person, one team can do it. It was really a national collaboration in a way to allow us to do what we do.
一发和团队经过70天的投入，才完成清理这副鲸鱼骨架。
We realized that every single intervertebral disc fits very specifically to each of the bone. So if you mismatch them, they will not fit. So labeling everything was so important to us. It was very challenging because there are actually a lot of techniques to employ. And so I actually had a lot of help from my colleagues who have had experience like this.
1980年代，由卓春梅保管的动物标本，眼看就要4分5裂了。
后来，一个自然协会的秘书写了一篇报道 ，Save Our Heritage。这一篇报纸出来了之后，接触下来就有相当多的反应，说因这样好的收藏品，假如失去了，这将是永远遗失。
国外的博物馆也来信，表示愿意接手这批堪称全球最完整的东南亚动物标本。
美国的自然博物馆的馆长写信给新加坡政府，后来我有拿到他的这个稿，写给李光耀的一封信，告诉他这个收藏品的价值。
随后，这批标本的命运峰回路转。1987年，国大决定在科学系图书馆开放3层楼的空间收藏这批标本。经过16年的折腾，这批标本终于有了一个安身之处。直到2015年，才搬到李光前自然历史博物馆。
讲到这些事情，有时候我很激动，我要坚持下去，不能够半途而废。
除了标本之外，自然历史博物馆里的采集记录也是重要的历史资料。
These data sheets were from a really, really old project. And when I asked around, no one really knew anything about it. And when I looked through the paperwork, I realized there's one particular person, Mrs. Young, who worked on it, and she was the main researcher. So if I were to meet her, I would definitely ask her about this.
卓春梅2004年退休后，便以荣誉研究员的身份在博物馆进行研究，直到2017年才暂停科研工作。
Hi, Mrs. Young. It's so nice to meet you. My name's Aoife. So I found this of yours. Do you remember?
Oh, yes.
今天他回到自然历史博物馆，跟年轻的科学研究员一发见个面。
When I looked through every single data log that was so detailed and the number of medusae, which are jellyfish that I was so interested in, I was really excited. I was like wondering, where are these?
I think you should go to the plankton section.
Plankton section.
We have freshwater plankton, and then the other one is marine plankton. I think freshwater one is kept separately.
That's amazing.
They are very small.
Yeah. What are the challenges that you faced on the expedition? Like, were you the only female in the team?
Yeah, sometimes I'm the only female, sometimes not.
90年代，卓春梅为了采集标本，冒着生命危险进入荒山野外。
那么有一次是晚上，在泰国北部，他们就看我没上来，就倒转回来跟我讲 ：“Mrs. Yang， 我看你走得很辛苦啊，你就在这边等啊。”我说：“哎呀，不要啊！等下老虎出来我怎么办？我自己一个，所以极辛苦也跟着他们进去。”
I can't imagine facing the challenges that she did at that time. It must have been a lot more difficult, a lot more DIY, and I think that kind of resilience in itself is very inspiring. So, Mrs. Yang, I heard that you also studied your master's while working. Was it really tough for you?
Yeah, it was tough. I collect the samples weekly, every week.
Wow.
Nighttime collecting, then next day bring back and study.
After meeting Mrs. Yang, I realized that there is a potential for me to take for granted what we have today. Like, there was this one portion where she had to remind me that at that time, there was no museum. So I was very lucky to have like a whole bunch of people.
看到一法很年轻的研究员，对他的研究项目很热心，很有进取心，很高兴有人在这一方面做研究。
This is my very first drawing that was published. It's very, very difficult for me because I wasn't sure how to properly transfer details from the actual 3D form into a 2D form. My favorite expedition is my very first one, which was to Christmas Island. I think that was also very eye-opening. Yeah, so I think different habitats and different expeditions teach me so many different things.
今天，卓春梅回来博物馆与老同事叙旧。这群晚辈当初在卓春梅的鼓励与激发下，投身于科研。
你们实际上就很热情，他就非常支持我们抓到什么奇怪的东西带回来放去博物馆咯。他也是很欣赏我们的帮忙。
他们还记得我的兴趣，所以改天我会回来继续做这一方面的研究。
I'll say that what one can learn from Mrs. Yang is that her perseverance and her scientific integrity. She realized there was a gap in scientific knowledge for insects, so she decided to put herself and challenge herself to work on aquatic insects.
我每一天早上都会来这个公园散步，过后呢，我就做一些伸展运动，跟用这些器材做一些拉的运动，就是希望说我通过做一些运动调好我的身体，就想说要回去继续做我的研究。
其实当初卓春梅正经历一场大病，治疗过程曾一度想要放弃。
经历的这个治疗过程是很辛苦的，我甚至有一度想要放弃生命，因为我受不了。
正当卓春梅陷入绝望之际，她被告知成功登上2018年新加坡杰出妇女荣誉榜。 这奖项是赞扬卓春梅当年在保管来佛士动物收藏馆标本所付出的辛劳。
我在很困难的时候，身体状况很不好的时候，知道的这个奖是给我一个很强的兴奋剂。我最喜欢的就是这个艺术。风吹的时候，树叶就会慢慢飘下来，你会觉得心情很好。我们人生常常会碰到很多困境，但是当有机会的时候，尽量争取、坚持，不要放弃，最后是会成功的。
Every story of every specimen is unique. Each have their own story to how they came about to belong in the gallery or belong to the museum.
The poppy is my favorite flower as it is associated with symbols of relief, remembrance, and eternal rest.